Hello. I'd like to start by hello. I'd like to start with a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. It has gradually become clear to me what every great philosopher up until now has consisted of, namely, the confession of its originator, in a species of involuntary and unconscious autobiography, and moreover, that the moral or immoral purpose in every philosophy has constituted the true vital gem out of which the entire planet has always grown. Now, I find that quote to be interesting because it's sort of articulating something that I've thought a lot about for a while now, but even wrote a paper about it a little while back. And it's this idea of philosophy as a kind of cure. But not just that, but a philosopher's using philosophy as a kind of self-cure, if you see what I mean. Because, historically speaking, philosophy was thought of as a kind of cure for, what we would call mental disorders or mental illnesses. At least the kinds that didn't make you incredibly incapacitated. Whereas like the physician was curing your body, the philosopher was curing your mind, getting you over certain irrational ideas or beliefs, helping you overcome, sadness or a consumption with money or something to that effect. People will turn to or did turn to like Epicureanism as a way of curing their fear of death, or people will still turn to Stoic philosophy. So there's even a whole modern Stoic movement. And so people will, because some of what the Stoics say amounts to a kind of cognitive behavioral therapy. Sort of not getting wrapped up in the comings and goings of the world, a certain degree of emotional detachment, which, not to say a Stoic, wouldn't have emotions, but it's to say you don't let any of them like destabilize you. You maintain a certain kind of rational control, which I think the Stoics would say is actually kind of built into the universe itself, but that's a whole other tangent. Or people will turn to Buddhism, for example. So people will meditate as a way of getting over, as a way of not attaching themselves to their thoughts anymore, as a way of helping their anxiety, helping them stay like grounded in the moment. All that I think is pretty straightforward. I don't think there would be too many criticisms there. But the addition that I would want to add that I think is worth exploring more, and this isn't, an empirical claim, this is just a hunch, but that philosophers are using their philosophy as a way of overcoming their own anxieties, their own concerns and confusions. Now, again, that's a big claim and would require a lot of evidence to back up. Especially because nowadays philosophy's become like a professionalized activity, so it's no longer about necessarily how to live in the world. It's become an activity for specialists to debate certain interpretations of certain texts or ideas. And so it can seem, I think, much more removed from, the meat and bones of everyday life. But I don't think, I still think there's something to this idea of So some people, not, I don't think everyone, I mean, maybe everyone feels this to one degree or another, but I think especially people who like turn to like philosophy, they have like, it begins with like existential questions. So like, what's the meaning of life? You know, why am I here? I mean, theology could explain some of that too, but how do I be a person in the world? What's right? I can't talk. What's right and what's wrong? Like, what is beauty? Like these questions that are very basic, fundamental. Most of us have like thought about them at least, you know, here and there. I think this is where philosophy begins because it's taking existence to be a kind of puzzle in itself, right? Like, why do we exist? And I mean, that's a question people will ask. Why something rather than nothing? And so when you take existence to be itself a puzzle, and when you kind of feel like the weight of existence in some way, perhaps the kind of arbitrariness of it, right? Like I could potentially not exist, but I do exist, and like, you know, it seems like I exist in a world that's not that doesn't necessarily care about me. You know, a lot of things seem very arbitrary, very contingent. You know, where does that leave me? And so I think people will turn to philosophy. Some people will, and create like these metaphysical systems or these ethical systems, as a way of making themselves feel better about their existence and about their life. And it's not just some like abstract search for truth, right? Like Hannah Arendt says this in an interview. She said like, well, like, you know, the philosopher is concerned with the bigger picture, is concerned with truth, which is, you know, the same for across the board, the same for everyone. And so there's some fundamental tension she sees between philosophy and politics, because the philosopher is speaking for the whole. Someone involved in politics is not speaking for the whole. They're speaking for something much more confined. They're making much smaller claims, say the claims of an interest group. And that's one way to think about philosophy, but I'm not super convinced by that. It seems very romantic, very highfalutin. I think philosophy does boil down to these personal concerns. And like I said, so once you turn existence into a problem, because you might not, right? You might just say, well, I exist, and that's it, right? And not worry about it, and just keep existing, live your life, yada yada. And like good things will happen to you, bad things will happen to you. Eventually, you die, and like you don't have to worry about it, right? That's one approach. One approach is, well, we exist, and that's, you know, there's nothing beyond just the arbitrary fact that we exist. But like critical minds, like people who are just, you know, petulant and asking annoying questions, you know, like Socrates, it's like, well, no, like this existence is a problem, right? It might make sense to not exist more than to exist. And like, because we exist, there comes all these burdens, all these confusions, all this stuff we have to figure out. And that's again where I think philosophy comes into play. You know, because like, take metaphysics. So I'm somewhat critical of metaphysics, somewhat skeptical of it, because it seems to me more like a collection of stories that we could tell ourselves to explain how the world works, rather than getting at how the world actually works. But like, if we have a certain metaphysics, so say I'm committed to idealism, you know, I truly think the only thing that exists is the mind, is ideas. And everything else is just sort of a reflection, an offshoot of mind. Right, that gives me a basis, a foundation on which to think about the world. The world is mind, right? And when I see books and plants and trees and people, I am seeing, to some extent, mental constructions. And I'm going to treat them as real because they feel real to me. And again, that's a way of explaining why things exist. And then you can, live your life with that explanation, and that's it. Because I think people they have this desire to know, and people who go into philosophy tend to be, they have that desire on steroids. And so they need to come up with explanations. Now, whether they're actually true or not, whether they're really a reflection of the external world, who knows? But the philosophy itself is serving as a psychological tool for the philosopher and for those learning about philosophy. So I don't know, that feels like it almost undermines philosophy. Like, it feels like I'm saying, well, philosophy is just like window dressing. It's just like it's like putting on putting on makeup to cover the blemishes, or like brushing the dirt under the rug. It doesn't really solve anything. It's just a placeholder. It's kind of like this was I think what Camus' criticism of something like religion. It's just a band-aid. It doesn't really allow you to accept the fact that we're searching for meaning in a meaningless universe, and we should just stare that fact in the face. Period. So you might say well, okay, then philosophy is kind of useless. It's kind of unnecessary because it might not be actually getting at the truth. It's just these mental band-aids for philosophers to use. But I mean, I don't think that means it's an unworthy activity, because if you think of philosophy as interpretation, which is I'm not super well read in hermeneutics, but I'm sort of inclined to think of philosophy in that way. These interpretations, again, mean something to us, right? And we have lives that we want to interpret. And so, I don't think there's anything wrong with engaging in different interpretations, seeing their strengths, seeing their weaknesses, deciding what metric we want to use when evaluating interpretations. I think there's value in that pursuit. Just because, we're storytelling creatures, we're ideological creatures. That's sort of just what we want, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to tell stories about ourselves and the world. Why not tell, rational stories? Why not tell stories that have some basis in logic and have some basis in sound argumentation? So we can still say philosophy, even if philosophy is stems from this idea Nietzsche's getting at of unconscious autobiography. Because another thing too is certain philosophers are concerned with certain problems and not others, right? And that's partly going to be a reflection of their culture, but it's partly going to be a reflection of who they are. What kind of person are they? And what kind of person they are can dictate, rather, what kind of questions they think are worthy of pursuit, or what questions need to be answered. And then other ones will be left aside because they're not important to that person. So it's like, when reading philosophy and when studying philosophy, it's obviously important to think about, well, what are philosophers leaving out? Because they just didn't see as important. Because, we might find that stuff important, we, the readers. Our interests might be very different from the interests of Derrida or Foucault or something. So yeah, I mean, this was just a stream of conscious rant. This is just me getting some thoughts out there. Again, I've written a paper about this, but I didn't want to I've read papers verbatim before on this channel, but I didn't really want to do that. I just wanted to get these thoughts out there and see what people thought about them. So yeah, let me know in the comments like what you think about this idea of philosophy as cure, or philosophy as a way for philosophers to overcome their anxieties, and like the value of like that enterprise. So thank you for listening, and take care.